Rain needled the diner windows, like it was trying to scrape the light off the glass. Neon bled red and blue across the formica tables, warping in the puddles outside. Inside everything was small noises and routine, the rattle of plates, the soft hiss of the coffee machine, the jukebox coughing out an old rock song that nobody was really listening to. Ash sat in the last booth by the window, back to the wall, eyes on nothing in particular. His jacket was damp at the shoulders, his cut darker with rain. A plate of overcooked eggs cooled in front of him. He ate slow, more out of habit than hunger, the way men did when they weren't in a rush to get anywhere. He had one boot stretched out heel hooked on the opposite bench, his other foot planted under the table. The coffee was bad, but it was hot, and he wrapped both hands around the mug like he needed the heat to get into his bones. The bell over the door hadn't jingled in 10 minutes. The road outside was empty. It was the kind of night where nothing much happened. Then a blur of red moved in the corner of his vision. The girl didn't walk, she dove. 1 second, the space between his boots was empty tile. The next, a small body in a red hoodie slid across the linoleum and crashed into his shins. Sneakers squeaked, her knees hit his boot, bounced, then folded tight to her chest as she curled compact, like she had practiced this exact motion before. Ash's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He looked down. 2 brown eyes stared up at him so wide it didn't make sense that they weren't spilling tears. Her face was pale freckles standing out sharp. Mud flecked the hem of her hoodie. She was breathing too fast, each inhale a tiny soundless flinch. Her lips moved. The voice that came out barely counted as sound. "Don't move," she whispered. "He's here." The jukebox clicked off mid-song, a needle thunk that felt too loud. Somewhere at the counter a spoon stopped stirring sugar. The space seemed to hold its breath with her. The bell over the door jingled. Ash didn't turn. He didn't have to. The air changed. Boots crossed the threshold, slow, steady steps that didn't bother to soften on old linoleum. Whoever it was walked like he expected people to move without being asked. Ash felt the girl press closer to his leg fingers, twisting into the worn leather of his boot. The waitress, a woman in a faded blue uniform, cut herself off halfway through. "Hon, you need a refill." Her voice drifted into silence. "Evening," a man said. Soft, polite, coated in something that wasn't warm. Ash watched the reflection in the window instead of turning. The newcomer's shape was clean lines and dry edges. Jacket pressed. Collar neat. Shoes with a shine that didn't belong to that road on that night. Everyone else who had come in that evening had been soaked at the cuffs, shoulders dark with rain. This one looked like the weather had gotten out of his way. "Sorry to bother," the man said. "I'm looking for my stepdaughter. 9 years old, brown hair, red hoodie." A pause just long enough to sound tender. She ran off. "Sensitive kid, gets scared. I'm just trying to get her home safe." The waitress forced a smile that didn't hold. "Stepdaughter," she repeated, like she needed the word to make sense out loud. "That's right." The man's voice stayed velvety, practiced. Under the table, the girl's nails dug into Ash's boot. Small hand clamped so tight, he could feel the tremor through the leather. He moved just enough to shift his foot closer to her. No other reaction. Coffee to lips. Eyes on the dark glass. The man Dennis Ash guessed, because men like this always had names like that, moved through the diner with easy ownership. He leaned slightly to peer into booths, glanced under seats, offered apologies with his mouth while his eyes scraped the room. Nobody answered him. Nobody told him to leave. The cook's reflection vanished from the little pass window to the kitchen like he'd stepped back out of sight. The man's footsteps stopped at Ash's table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Ash's grip tightened around the mug. He let himself look up just enough for one eye to show under the brim of his cap. "Full up," he said. The opposite bench was empty. The man smiled anyway, the expression thin and controlled. "You traveling with someone?" he asked. Ash blinked slowly. He could feel the girl under the table, her breath shivering against his ankle. "Something like that," he said. The man's gaze flicked down, then back up. He didn't bend, didn't kneel. Men like him didn't lower themselves if they could help it. "You seen a little girl tonight?" he asked, tone light. "Red hoodie?" Spooked, Ash took a sip of coffee that had gone from bad to lukewarm. "No, you sure?" The man kept his voice soft, as if he were asking about the weather. Ash set the mug down carefully. "I said no." Silence stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. The waitress shifted her weight behind the counter, the sound of her shoes on the floor sharp in the stillness. The man studied him for a long moment. His smile returned a little tighter, like it was hooked onto something under the skin. "Some folks lie without knowing it," he said. "You ever think about that?" Ash held his gaze and didn't answer. The smile dropped, like someone had cut the string holding it up. The man straightened. "Well," he said softly, "appreciate your time." He turned away, step measured, not hurried. The bell over the door jingled again. The roar of rain rushed in for a beat, then cut off when the door latched. Only then did the jukebox stutter itself awake, a scratch of sound before the track resumed. The room exhaled. Ash pushed his plate aside and slid out of the booth. His knees complained as he crouched. Under the table, the girl was still curled up, arms locked around her legs, fingers white on the denim of his jeans. He set his forearm on the seat, lowering himself until his face was level with hers. "You okay?" he asked. Her head bobbed in a jerky nod. When she tried to speak, the first attempt came out as a rasp. She swallowed, hard eyes on his chest. The waitress took a step closer, dish towel twisted in her hands. "You want me to call someone?" she asked. "Cops, maybe?" "No." Ash didn't raise his voice, but it cut clean through the space. He softened it when he looked back at the girl. "We're leaving." Her fingers tightened again. "Will he follow?" she whispered. Ash thought about the way the man had stood dry in the doorway, the way he'd measured every table, the way he'd walked out unbothered like the world owed him time. If he's smart, Ash said no. That left room for what he already suspected. He offered his hand. It hung there between them for a heartbeat before she let go of his leg and reached for it, small and shaking. He pulled her out from under the table. The hoodie was darker at the cuffs, damp one sleeve, smeared with something that might have been dirt or old blood. Her sneakers squeaked on the tile. They crossed the diner together. The waitress watched them go, lips pressed tight like she was holding back the name of the man who had just left. The bell chimed as they stepped into the rain. The parking lot was mostly empty. Water ran in thin rivers along the cracked asphalt. Under one of the lamps, a sedan waited. Lights off, engine running. The exhaust curled in steady white breaths into the night. Ash felt those eyes on his back without needing to see them. He didn't pause. He kept the girl close hand resting lightly over her shoulder as they cut toward the far corner of the lot where his bike sat under a flickering light. Up close, the machine was all steel and scars paint, dulled by time. Rain had already collected on the seat. The girl stopped when she saw it. "No helmet," she said, "barely more than air." "We won't be long," Ash said. He swung a leg over the bike and settled into the seat. The air smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust and cheap coffee. He looked back at her. You trust me." She stared at him for a second that felt longer than it was. Then she climbed up behind him, her arms locked around his middle, and this time her grip felt less like panic and more like decision. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, a harsh, living sound that bounced off the diner walls. Neon jittered in the puddles. At the edge of the lot in the dark sedan, the man sat very still. His face was almost invisible, just the suggestion of a profile. If he moved, Ash didn't see it. Ash turned the handlebars away from the main road, away from the lights, toward the darker strip of county blacktop that cut into the trees. He let out the clutch. The bike rolled forward, tires hissing through standing water. The diner fell away behind them, neon shrinking, then disappearing. Somewhere in the lot, an engine's idle deepened. Headlights stayed off. If the man liked the chase, he'd picked the wrong night to enjoy it. The road thinned into silence as Ash steered the bike deeper into the woods. The rain eased to a cold whisper, clinging to Chloe's sleeves as she held on to him, not with fear this time, but with a kind of rigid certainty, as if letting go meant the world would snap open beneath her. They cut off the main road tires, crunching through gravel, then dirt, until the beam of the headlight washed over a shape ahead, an abandoned gas station swallowed in weeds. The building slouched beneath a sagging awning, windows, boarded pumps, rusted but still standing like old bones. It was the kind of place that had given up on being found long before they arrived. Ash killed the engine. Chloe didn't move. Even when the roar faded into the drip, drip, drip of water falling from the gutters, her hands stayed locked in the folds of his jacket. He waited a moment before speaking. "You can breathe," he said quietly. She let out a small, shaky exhale, as if she'd forgotten breathing was a thing she was allowed to do. Her fingers peeled from his vest, one by one, leaving tiny crescent marks in the leather. He stepped off the bike, first boots, landing on damp concrete. Chloe followed, slower eyes flitting to the trees, the shadows, the broken sign. There was no fear of this place on her face, only fear of the places behind them. Ash reached into a saddlebag and pulled out his jacket. She didn't argue when he draped it over her. It swallowed her completely, sleeves dragging near her knees. They sat on the low concrete step at the front. The moon slipped between clouds, landing pale light across her face. The rain had left her hair stringy and tangled. "What's your name?" Ash asked. "Chloe." She hugged her knees, tighter voice almost lost to the open air. He nodded. "Ash." Her eyes flicked up once. "Is that your real name? Real enough?" A thin moment of quiet settled, the kind that could crack either way. A coyote howled far off, its voice stretched thin over the tree line. Chloe startled. "He's not out here," Ash said. "You don't know him." Her voice returned sharp, too sharp for someone that small. Whatever she'd lived with, it had cut her down to instincts and warnings. Ash didn't respond. He let her continue on her own terms. She stared ahead at nothing, words slow at first, then picking their own speed. "He keeps the door locked." Ash stayed still. "What door?" "The basement." She blinked once, and that was the only sign she remembered the dark. "He says it's so I don't wander," she whispered. "But sometimes he forgets to unlock it." Ash's jaw tensed. Memories of other kids, other houses flickered behind his eyes, but he didn't let any of them spill into his voice. "Your room," she shook her head. "Only when I make noise." She lifted a sleeve. Beneath the fabric, her arm was a map of bruises, green melting into yellow, dark purple still blooming. Old ones layered beneath new ones like the rings of a cut tree. "He says I bruise easy," she said. "Most people do." Ash breathed out slow, through his nose. She reached again inside his jacket's inner pocket, fingers fishing for something until she found it, a wrinkled, nearly torn photograph. She flattened it on her lap, a younger version of her smiling beside a tired-looking woman in a hospital gown, wristband visible. The mother's hair pulled back, dark circles under her eyes, but she was smiling at the girl like she was the only light in the room. Chloe flipped the photo over. A scribble in shaky ink read Gina R. Mercy General, the 15th of March 2020. My mom, Chloe murmured. He said she gave me to him. Ash shook his head once. She didn't. You don't know that. I know enough. Chloe folded the photo carefully and tucked it back into the lining of Ash's jacket like she needed it hidden safe. She didn't look at him when she said the next part. I used to think she'd come back. Maybe she ran away from him too. Maybe she just forgot me. Ash swallowed the knot in his throat. She didn't forget. Silence spread between them again. Not empty, just fragile. Chloe picked at a loose thread on the sleeve. If I go to the cops, he shows his papers, she said. Then they give me back. I know they do. They did before. Ash didn't let the anger reach his face. He just nodded once, slow. No, he said. She turned to him, unsure. No, he's not getting you back. The way she stared at him like she wanted to believe but didn't know how was the first break in her armor. Ash rose and stepped to the edge of the trees, taking out a scratched burner phone. His thumb hovered over a number that wasn't saved as anything but digits. He placed the call. It rang 3 times. A tired voice answered. Yeah. She's 9, Ash said. Chloe. Red hoodie, ran from a guy calling himself her stepdad. Dennis Cole. You got anything on him? Not yet. What's the situation? He's got custody papers. They're good enough to fool a rookie. I need background. Fast, fast. A pause crackled through the line. Give me a few hours. Make it 1. He hung up and texted one word, rally. The message pinged off the tower miles away. Ash pocketed the phone and returned to the step. Chloe was staring at the empty road like it was a place people didn't come back from. You hungry? Ash asked. She nodded. He pulled a crushed protein bar from his saddlebag and offered it. She peeled the wrapper slowly, taking tiny bites like she wasn't convinced it belonged to her. Night folded in around them, heavy and watchful. Chloe's voice finally broke it. Will he find us? Ash looked at the tree line. Not here, he said. He didn't add, not tonight, not with me. Above them, a scrap of moonlight cut across the broken station roof. The woods didn't feel safe, but they felt safer than where she'd come from. And soon safer than where Ash planned to go next. The woods thickened around the station, shadows pulled long by the fading moon. Chloe had stopped eating halfway through the protein bar. It rested in her lap, now crumbling at the edges from how tightly she'd held it. Her shoulders twitched at every distant sound, branches, shifting water, dripping the sigh of wind pushing through the pine needles. Ash didn't push her for more words. Some kids needed space to speak. Others needed silence to remember how. Then, faint at first, like a memory trying to break the surface, came the low hum of engines. Chloe stiffened. Ash listened, posture, shifting the way men who've lived on roads recognize familiar thunder. Not police. Not tourists. Something far older, a second hum layered over the first. Then a third. A fourth. They were coming. Dust rose along the dirt road before the headlights did, not bright ones dimmed intentionally the way riders approached places that demanded respect. 4 bikes rolled into the clearing like ghosts with steel bones. Engines idled, low heat shimmering in the cool air. Each rider wore the same cut on their back iron order. Chloe pressed against the step, eyes wide with a panic that didn't yet know what shape to take. Ash stood beside her, not blocking her, not pushing her, just close enough that if she bolted, she wouldn't run alone. The bike stopped in a line. Engines cut. The clearing went quiet. Clara climbed off first. Her boots hit the ground soft. Her hair was braided tight, jacket patched from years of miles, eyes sharp but warm. She walked toward Chloe with her hands visible, slow but sure, like one does with animals who've learned every touch means pain. "You hungry?" Clara asked, kneeling to Chloe's level. Chloe didn't answer, but her hands fidgeted, small tremors pulling at Ash's jacket sleeves. Clara reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped sandwich and a bottle of juice. Apple or grape? A tiny pause. Grape. Clara handed it over with gentle precision, as if giving something sacred. She didn't smile, didn't soften her voice. Kids like Chloe didn't trust softness. Rick, Jonah, and Mason stepped off their bikes next, keeping distance, giving the girl space to breathe. Jonah approached Ash. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. Ash nodded. "He's got papers. The kind that look real." Rick pulled a cigarette from behind his ear and lit it with a flick. Smoke curled in tight spirals around him. "Tied to anyone bigger?" he asked. "Not yet," Ash said. "But it feels wrong." Mason set his backpack on the hood of Jonah's truck, flattening out a battered tablet he'd patched together from scrap parts and stubbornness. The screen flickered, then steadied. "Got eyes on his place," Mason said. "Route 19. House, garage, basement, electric fence on the west side." Chloe looked up at that. Not at the men, at the word basement. Ash crouched beside her. "You told me about the locks," he said gently. "Did they go on the outside?" She nodded. It was a small motion, but it struck like a flare in the dark. Clara walked over to the men. She heard other voices, she said. Rick's cigarette paused halfway to his mouth. "Other kids, not sure," Clara said, "but crying." Then nothing. Jonah's jaw tightened. "That's not a one-man setup." Ash's voice dropped to something cold. "We scout tonight. No daylight." Mason zoomed in on the satellite map. Driveway cameras. Porch cams. Nothing inside, I can confirm. Rick exhaled a slow stream of smoke. "We go quiet." Chloe sat on the grass near the step juice bottle held between her palms. She watched everything, every shift, every sound, every man in the clearing. She wasn't just scared. She was taking inventory. Ash recognized that look. Survivors did it without trying. He approached her. "You'll stay with Clara and Mason," he said. "Safe house one town over." Chloe swallowed. "He finds people. He won't find you." Her eyes darted toward the trees as if expecting Dennis to emerge at any moment. "What if he brings someone else?" she asked. Ash didn't lie. "Then we bring more than someone." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded like she wanted to believe. When dusk thinned into night, they left. Chloe stood with Clara at the station's edge, jacket sleeves hanging past her hands, watching the riders mount up. She didn't wave, didn't speak, just stared like she was memorizing the backs of the men walking toward something dangerous on her behalf. Ash started his bike last. The engine rumbled under him, steady, promising. He looked at Chloe once. She didn't blink. He revved the throttle. The clearing filled with engine growls vibrating through the ground beneath their boots. 4 headlights cut into the trees. Then they were gone. The ride to Route 19 wasn't long, but it was heavy. Roads that should have been alive with frogs, crickets, night rustle felt empty. Too empty. Rick leaned over his handlebars. "Feels staged." Ash didn't disagree. They separated 2 houses down from the target. Jonah took the back through the tree line. Rick circled wide to the west fence. Mason hung back with binoculars. Ash approached the front door with a mechanic's calm. No colors, no noise, just the creak of old wood under his boots. He knocked. Once. Twice. The door cracked open. Dennis, same smile, same fake warmth. Different eyes, more alert now, like he'd spent the last hour staring into the dark waiting for something to arrive. "Help you?" Dennis asked, tone dipped in politeness. Ash didn't look at the smile. He looked at the twitch in the man's jaw. "We heard you were looking for your stepdaughter," Ash said flatly. "Saw a flyer at the diner." Dennis didn't blink. "That was handled." Rick stepped into view. "Didn't say she was found." "No need," Dennis said. "She's home." Ash tilted his head. "Mind if we talk to her?" Dennis's posture shifted, not aggressive but protective in a way that only made the air colder. "No," he said. Rick lifted a hand. "We don't want trouble." Dennis stepped backward. "Then leave." Rick eyed the hallway visible behind him. A door at the end. Bolt on the outside. Scratches near the frame. Ash felt something sharpen behind his ribs. He stepped inside without asking. Dennis didn't smile anymore. And the house didn't smell like home. It smelled like bleach, fighting something older underneath. Rick's voice darkened. Basement Ash nodded once. Jonah's voice crackled in their earpieces. Back door secured. "He's not alone," Ash exhaled. "Then neither are we." And the next step they took wasn't quiet. It was war. The house swallowed sound the moment Ash stepped inside. The air was thick, too clean on the surface, too wrong underneath, like bleach laid over something that had tried to scream its way out. Rick closed the door behind them with a soft click. Jonah moved through the kitchen toward the back hall, pipe gripped low. Mason stayed out of sight, watching through the front window's reflection. Dennis didn't move at first. He stood a few feet away, hands loose at his sides, chest rising too steady for a man faced with intruders. "Last warning," Dennis said quietly. "Leave." Ash didn't answer. He walked deeper into the house boots, whispering across carpet that looked too new for a man who lived alone. Rick followed eyes, scanning angles, corners, the door frames. He stopped when he saw the bolt. Same as the satellite image. Same scratches. Same story as Chloe's voice. He tapped the metal once with his knuckle. The sound was hollow. "Wrong." Dennis stepped forward, blocking their view. "She gets night terrors. Hurts herself sometimes. The lock, it's for safety." Ash didn't blink. "Open it." "No." Rick braced a shoulder against the frame, testing strength. The bolt rattled. Ash's voice dropped to something colder than anger. "Keys." Dennis shook his head, jaw tightening. "You're trespassing. Cops get here fast, out here." Ash's hand hovered near his belt, not on a weapon, but close enough that Dennis saw the intent. That was enough. Jonah's voice crackled quietly in their earpieces. Movement downstairs. 2 voices, 1 adult. Not Dennis. Dennis saw Rick's reaction. His posture cracked. "Don't," he warned. "You're making a mistake." Ash stepped aside to give Rick room. Rick planted his boot beside the lock. The kick echoed through the hallway. The bolt snapped. The door swung inward. A stale, warm gust rose from the basement stairs like breath trapped too long in a sealed place. A single weak bulb flickered below, casting a stuttering cone of light onto concrete. Dennis didn't lunge. He didn't scream. He didn't even try to run. he whispered. "You don't understand," like it was a prayer. Ash brushed past him and descended. The stairs creaked under his boots. The flickering bulb overhead made the shadows jump long, then short, then long again. Rick followed close behind. Jonah slipped in from the back entrance, meeting them halfway down. Near the bottom, voices died mid-sentence. Silence fell so sudden that Ash felt pressure in his ears. He hit the last step and turned. 3 kids huddled in a corner, 2 boys, 1 girl, no older than 12. Eyes wide, bare feet pressed to cold concrete backs curled like they were expecting a blow. Facing them stood Dennis holding a tray of food like he'd been caught feeding animals. And beside him, nearly blending into the dim, was a second man. Tall, thin, white hair tied back, arms sleeved in curling black tattoos that looked like smoke trying to climb out of his skin. His face held no fear, only recognition. "Ah," he said softly, "the vigilantes arrive." Dennis flinched at the man's tone, stepping back. I didn't." "You never do," the white-haired man said. Rick moved beside Ash, stance widening. "Tell me that's not Gray." The tattooed man tilted his head. "Names matter less than outcomes." Jonah emerged from the shadows behind him, pipe raised. "Step away from the kids." The man didn't move. "One of them is mine," he said. Ash's jaw tightened. "They're not anyone's. You think you're saving them," the man murmured. "But you're just interrupting." Rick spat on the floor. "We're not saving. We're ending." The man's eyes flicked from one of them to the next. Calculating. Testing. Then he smiled. "You'll need more fire than that," Ash answered, without hesitation. "We brought it." The fight didn't burst open. It snapped. Dennis bolted toward the stairs. Jonah grabbed him by the shirt, yanked him backward, and slammed him against the wall. The tray clattered food scattering across the floor. Rick charged the tattooed man. The stranger moved faster than expected, sidestepped, reached for something at his belt, but Mason had warned them. Rick anticipated the shift. Jonah struck low pipe connecting with the man's knee. A crack echoed. The man staggered. Rick drove a blow into his ribs. Ash grabbed his arm before he could reach his waistband. The man gasped, teeth bared in the flicker of the bulb. "You think this is the end?" Ash didn't answer. His fist did. The man hit the ground, tattoos crawling across his arms like dying embers. Dennis sobbed somewhere behind them. Jonah pinned him with a knee. "Save it," Jonah muttered. "You had your chance." Ash turned to the kids. The oldest boy, whispered voice cracking, He said no one would come." Ash knelt, meeting the boy's eyes. "We did." The girl hid behind him, thin hands burying in her sleeve. The youngest clutched a small blanket, shaking so hard his breath came in hiccups. Rick checked the corners. Jonah zip-tied Dennis's hands behind his back. The tattooed man stayed down, chest rising shallow. Ash stood. "Get them out." Jonah guided the children up the stairs, speaking quietly, firmly, never touching them without warning. Rick poured bleach across the concrete, erasing whatever had been done down here. Mason appeared in the doorway, pulling the fuse to cut the cameras. Ash stayed last. He looked at the cot. The scratch marks on the boards. The trembling bulb. He let himself feel the anger for 1 second, then he left it there. Outside, the night felt colder. Jonah handed the kids soft blankets from the truck. Rick dropped the broken locks into a rusted fire pit and flicked his lighter. Metal curled in the flames like paper. Ash stood in the yard, watching the smoke rise. Behind him, the children huddled on the porch, wrapped in blankets, backs pressed to the wooden beams, like they were grounding themselves. Chloe wasn't there. She was still miles away with Clara, but Ash could almost hear her voice in the tremble of the youngest boy. "Did you hear the singing?" the boy whispered to the girl beside him. The girl stiffened. "What singing?" When the lights went out, he murmured, "There's another room, under the basement. You can't see it, but it's there." The fire crackled. The wind cut through the yard. Ash turned slowly. "What room?" he asked. The boy's voice trembled. "He calls it the choir." Ash's blood went cold. Rick stepped forward, face tightening. "You sure?" The boy nodded. "It's where he took the ones who cried too loud." Jonah cursed under his breath. Ash looked at the burning metal, at the dark trees, at the kids clinging to the porch. This wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. He spoke quietly, voice low enough that only Rick and Jonah heard. "Gray has a system." Rick nodded, jaw clenched. "And we just cut one piece." Ash looked back at the children. "We're not done. Not until every door like that basement stayed open forever." The farm's porch light flickered as the truck pulled in. Mason killed the engine, and the sudden quiet pressed heavy on the night. The three rescued kids sat inside, wrapped in blankets, staring through the windshield like the world beyond it wasn't real yet. Clara stepped out before the vehicle fully stopped. Her boots thudded across the gravel. She opened the passenger door, gently, voice soft but practical. "Let's get you inside. One step at a time." The oldest boy hesitated. The girl moved first, gripping Clara's sleeve instead of her hand. The smallest followed, blanket trailing behind him like a fallen shadow. Ash dismounted his bike, last chest tight with the weight of what he still didn't know. The wind had shifted, carrying the smell of wet earth and wood smoke. A storm was coming. Inside the farmhouse, Chloe sat near the hearth, Ash's jacket still dwarfed around her shoulders. She wasn't drawing this time. She just stared at the floor, fingers tapping the wooden boards in a rhythm that wasn't random, too controlled, too familiar. She didn't notice the rescued kids until their silhouettes crossed the doorway. The moment she did, her tapping stopped. Clara led the trio to the couch. The girl kept her chin tucked, the older boy's shoulders tightened at every creak of the floorboards, and the youngest clutched his blanket as if any loosened grip would drag him back to the basement. Ash watched Chloe rise from the hearth, slow, unsure. She approached them like someone approaching their own memory. The smallest boy stepped forward first. "You were right," he whispered. "Chloe didn't understand. About what you said someone would come." His voice cracked. "You said the road people would find us." Clara glanced at Ash. "Road people." Ash exhaled through his nose. "That's what Gray's network must have called them. Ghost riders, outlaws, faceless threats." And Chloe had believed in them enough to tell someone else. Clara guided the kids toward the spare room, leaving the door open so they could see the light from the hallway. Rick leaned against the wall, rubbing his jaw. They're barely holding together. Jonah crossed his arms. "We need names, locations, anything they remember." Ash shook his head. "Not tonight. They need sleep first, answers later." Mason emerged from the kitchen, tablet under his arm. "I've got something. Been digging since we left the house." He set the tablet on the table. Grainy documents filled the screen, scanned reports, archived directories, old adoption records that looked like they'd been pulled off outdated servers. "What am I looking at?" Rick asked. "Gray's old life," Mason said. "Before the tattoos. Before the missing kids. Before everything burned." Ash leaned closer. Faded headlines filled the screen. "Pastor Thomas Gray accused of misconduct. Church dissolves. Local ministry solace heart shutters after investigation. No charges filed, lack of evidence." Jonah snorted. He walked free. Every time. Not walked, Mason corrected. Slipped. He swiped again. Newspaper clippings turned into spreadsheets. Dates. Transfers. Names. All children. Every town he moved to, Mason said, tapping the screen. A child vanished within 6 months. Rick's jaw clenched. How the hell did he get away with this? He built a system, Ash murmured. Dennis was just a piece. Chloe approached the table, still wrapped in Ash's jacket. Her eyes scanned the names Elise, Jordan, Marisol, and she froze when she reached the last one. That one, she whispered. I heard him say that name, which Mason asked. She pointed. Marisol R. age 10, last seen 2022, unconfirmed placement. Rick straightened. She's alive, Chloe's voice trembled. Gray visited Dennis one night. They talked downstairs. He said Marisol was next. Ash exchanged a look with Clara. If Marisol was alive, she wasn't far. And she wasn't alone. Before he could say anything, Chloe spoke again, quiet but certain. Gray's not done. Everyone fell silent. Chloe lifted her sleeve just enough to show small bruises near her elbow, the ones she hadn't shown before, circular marks in a pattern. Clara knelt beside her. Who did that? Chloe shook her head. Not Dennis. Ash crouched too, lowering himself to her level. Who, Chloe? She swallowed, hard eyes distant. The man with white hair. Rick went rigid. He called them. Reminders, Chloe whispered. He said every kid in the choir had them. Jonah's voice dropped. Choir. The room under the basement, Ash said. We didn't see it. Mason pulled up the blueprint he'd patched together earlier. There's no sub-basement on record. Doesn't mean it's not there, Rick muttered. Ash stood, running a hand down his face. If Gray has a choir, he said, then he has more kids. Clara folded her arms tightly. And he's moving them. Jonah kicked the leg of the table. So where is he now? Ash answered. Not with words, but with motion. He grabbed the burn phone from the shelf, scrolled through the incoming intel, and stopped at a message time-stamped 10 minutes earlier. Rick leaned in. What's it say? Ash read. Houses 3, 4, 5 burned tonight. Paper trails gone. He's scrubbing his network. Jonah cursed under his breath. He knows we're looking. No, Ash said quietly. He knows Chloe got away. That changed everything. Clara stepped beside Chloe, hand hovering near her shoulder without touching. He's going to hunt her. Chloe's voice cracked, but she forced it out. I'm not going back. Ash nodded. You aren't. He turned to the rest of the Iron Order. Their faces were set. No hesitation. No flinch. Mason closed the tablet. We still have one lead left. Rick grabbed his jacket. Which? The church, Mason said. The original Solace site. Before everything burned, Jonah frowned. The one out by the ridge. That place is dead. Ash met his eyes. So is every other place we thought he abandoned. Chloe stepped closer, barely a whisper between them. He'll go there. Ash didn't ask how she knew. Kids like her always knew where monsters returned to. He looked out the window toward the highway, the one that disappeared into pine and shadow. Then that's where we ride. And nobody questioned it. The ride to Marion Ridge felt longer than the mileage on the odometer. The air thinned the deeper they went into pine country headlights, cutting tunnels through mist that clung stubbornly to the road. No music, no chatter, just engines and breath. Ash led the formation, Rick flanking his right, Jonah close behind in the truck. Mason had stayed at the farm to guard the kids. Chloe remained there too. Clara wouldn't let her out of sight. The forest closed in as the road narrowed. Signs grew older, paint-peeling letters barely legible. Marion Ridge, 6 miles. Rick leaned over his handlebars. Dead town, he muttered. Ash didn't disagree. The wind carried no sounds of life, no dogs, no sirens, not even insects. Just the occasional rustle in the trees that didn't feel natural. They passed a school with boarded windows, a church with doors chained shut, street lamps flickering like tired eyes refusing to close. "This ain't right," Jonah's voice came low over the radio. Ash slowed as they reached the last turn leading toward the old soulless property. The building sat behind a rotting white fence, its sagging porch half swallowed by weeds. The chapel behind it leaned slightly, bell tower cracked. Rick coasted to a stop. "Looks empty." "Too empty," Jonas said, stepping out of the truck. Ash dismounted, boots crunching on gravel that hadn't been disturbed in weeks or had been swept clean on purpose. He approached the front door of the house. Knocked once, twice. Silence. He placed a hand on the doorknob. Unlocked. Rick raised an eyebrow. "That ain't friendly." Ash pushed the door open slowly. Hinges groaned dust, drifting from the frame like the house exhaled. Inside, the living room was staged couches covered in plastic floor, swept, no clutter, no life. The kind of clean that wasn't care but convenience. Rick scanned the corners. "He scrubbed this place. Or he's still using it," Jonah said, from the back flashlight cutting through the gloom. They cleared the rooms one by one. Bathroom empty. Kitchen stripped. Bedroom near blank, except for a mattress against the wall. Ash noticed something, then every surface smelled faintly of lemon and ammonia. He followed the scent to a door at the end of the hall. Heavy, reinforced hinges. New padlock. Jonah approached with bolt cutters. "On your mark." Ash nodded. The metal snapped with a dull pop. Rick pushed the door open. A flight of stairs descended into darkness. Ash went first. Halfway down, the smell changed, less bleach, more something kept too long in a sealed box. Dampness, fear, time. He reached the bottom and flicked on the basement light. A single bulb buzzed to life. Rick let out a breath. "You've got to be kidding." The walls were covered in symbols, crosses, twisted upside-down circles, intersecting lines like cages. Thick black strokes painted with something that dried uneven. "That paint?" Jonah asked. Ash didn't answer. He stepped closer. The strokes had texture. "Not paint," Rick swore. "He's escalating." Names covered the wall beneath the symbols. Dozens. First names only, some marked with dates, others crossed out entirely. Jonah pulled out his phone, photographing everything. "This is a ledger." Ash crouched near a crate in the corner. Inside, notebooks, files, photos. He flipped the first page. A girl, maybe 10, stood smiling stiffly. Beside it, a handwritten note: "G cleared transport, ETA 214. Ash's throat tightened. He wasn't hiding kids here, he said. He was sorting them. Rick slammed his fist against the wall. "We're behind. Again." Jonah backed toward the stairs. If he knew we were coming, a sound cut him off. Engines. Multiple. Ash extinguished the basement light. "Upstairs," he whispered. They moved quietly but fast, slipping back into the main floor. Through the broken blinds, headlights rolled into view. 3, maybe 4. Bikes. Not order bikes. Unknown patches. Rick's jaw tightened. Recruits. The porch boards creaked. Footsteps. Then a shadow moved past the window. Ash signaled them to flank positions. Rick by the kitchen doorway. Jonah behind the couch, Ash near the entry. The front door opened. A single figure stepped inside. Black coat, white collar, calm, gray. He closed the door behind him almost politely. "You're late," he said. Ash stepped forward. "You ran." "I walked," Gray corrected. "Running is for the frightened." Rick growled, "Where are the kids?" Gray smiled. "Safe from you." Jonah's grip tightened around the pipe. "You're not walking out." Gray ignored him. He looked at Ash instead, studying him, measuring him, almost grateful. "You come where I lead," he said. "That's what makes this so easy." Ash didn't move. "You don't lead anything anymore." Gray tilted his head. "Oh, but I do. And you proved it by arriving." He stepped aside. More footsteps entered from outside. 4 riders, faces hard patches sewn by hand, not earned. Recruited. Gray clasped his hands behind his back like a preacher before a sermon. "Shall we begin?" Ash's answer was motion. He lunged. The recruits moved at once. Rick intercepted one, throwing him against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. Jonah swept another off his feet. Ash caught a swinging chain, twisted it, drove his elbow into the man's throat. Gray vanished behind the chaos, slipping through the back door like shadow through a crack. "He's running!" Rick yelled. "No," Ash said, breath sharp. "He's circling us." Jonah darted outside, scanning the ridge. Moonlight cut across the hill behind the chapel. A single silhouette stood at the top. Gray, waiting. Ash felt it like a hook in the ribs. Rick hissed, "He wants us to follow." Jonah wiped blood from his cheek. "So what's the play?" Ash didn't hesitate. "We follow." Because Gray wanted to be hunted, and Ash was done letting him choose the path. He ran for the ridge boots, pounding the earth, Rick and Jonah close behind toward the ghost in the collar, the man who built a choir out of stolen children, the shadow who thought the order still feared him. Up the hill, through the mist, toward the ruin of the chapel, toward the man who believed he was untouchable. Tonight Ash intended to prove him wrong. Ash crested the ridge, first boots, grinding through loose gravel. His breath plumed white in the cold air, the mist clinging to him like a second skin. The hill dropped sharply on the far side, a tangle of brush and rock that swallowed the moonlight. Rick reached the top a second later, chest heaving, eyes scanning the tree line. Jonah arrived last, wiping blood from his cheek pipe still in hand. No Gray. Just wind hissing through the dead pines. Rick cursed under his breath. He was right here. Jonah scanned the slope. Tracks Ash found them first. Boot prints cutting a diagonal path down the rocks. Deep, clean, deliberate. Leading away from the chapel, leading into thicker darkness. But something was wrong. "Look," Ash said. The prints stopped abruptly 6 feet down the slope. Not faded. Stopped, like the man simply lifted out of the earth. Rick knelt. "Where the hell?" Jonah moved farther down, sweeping his flashlight. "Got something." Ash joined him. Below, half hidden by brush tire marks fresh. The ground beneath them still damp, grooves sharp. "Pickup," Rick said. "Heavy suspension." "Someone picked him up," Jonah added. Ash stared down the trail as if he could force the road to confess its secrets. "He didn't come alone," Ash said quietly. They followed the tire tracks to the lower trail, a narrow road barely wide enough for a single vehicle. The mud hadn't settled yet. Rick knelt again, running his fingers over the grooves. 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Jonah checked his watch. "We're behind." Ash exhaled long and controlled. Not by much. They rushed back to the house, moving fast but alert. The recruits Gray brought were gone, fled or dragged away. The front door hung open, swaying in the wind. Mason's voice crackled suddenly through Ash's earpiece. "You need to get back to the farm. Now." Ash froze. Rick turned sharply. Jonah's stiffened grip tightening around his pipe. "What happened?" Ash asked. Mason's voice was tight-rushed. "Clara says trucks were spotted near the back property line. 2 men on foot. They didn't get close, but Rick snapped. Mason hesitated. Chloe woke up screaming. Ash's heart kicked hard against his ribs. "Put Clara on." Static filled the line, then Clara's voice cracked through. "Ash, something's wrong." He didn't breathe. "Is she hurt?" "No," Clara said. But she said something before she woke up. Rick leaned closer as if proximity could speed up answers. "What did she say?" Ash demanded. "She said, 'He's here.'" Jonah swore under his breath. Ash's grip tightened on the radio. Clara locked down everything. "Nobody in or out." "I already did," she replied. "But Ash, she wasn't talking about Dennis or the tattooed guy." She said, "The quiet man." Ash went still. Rick frowned. Who? Jonah's eyes widened as memory snapped into place. The second handler. The one the boy mentioned, the one from the choir. Ash felt a cold coil tighten in his chest. Gray wasn't working alone anymore. He never had. They mounted up fast. Engines roared, cutting through the stillness of Marion Ridge. The road back was a blur of trees and wind. Every minute felt stolen. Halfway down the highway, Jonah honked twice and pulled ahead in the truck. Rick drifted close to Ash. "This is a setup," Rick said over the engine noise. "Gray distracted us. Someone else went for the girl." Ash didn't argue. He'd already come to the same conclusion 5 miles back. But it wasn't fear that drove him. It was recognition. Monsters like Gray didn't fight fair. They didn't fight alone, and they always came back for unfinished pieces. Chloe was a loose thread in a tapestry he wanted to keep whole. Ash pushed the throttle harder. The sky ahead lightened the farm's valley just beyond the next rise. When they turned into the long gravel driveway, the first thing Ash saw was Clara standing in the beam of the porch light crowbar in one hand, phone in the other. Her expression was fury, barely held in check. She rushed toward Ash before he even killed the engine. "She's inside," Clara said, "but you need to see what we found." Rick stepped up beside her. Where near the fence line, Jonah helped me drag it in. Jonah was already lifting something from the back of the truck, an object wrapped in a tarp. The shape wasn't large, but it was heavy enough to require both hands. He dropped it onto the porch with a dull metallic thud. Ash pulled the tarp aside. It was a lockbox, heavy, steel, new. Jonah tapped the dented lid. "Found this half buried under leaves, like someone left it just long enough to make sure we'd find it." Rick muttered, "A gift." Clara folded her arms, jaw tight. "Or a warning." Ash opened the box carefully. Inside were 4 items. 1. A folded map with a single route marked in red. 2. A key, old brass engraved with a symbol they had seen in Gray's basements. 3. A photograph of a cabin in the mountains time-stamped 2 days ago. 4. And at the bottom a small scrap of red fabric. Chloe's hoodie. Clara inhaled sharply. "She's still here. She never left the house." Ash shook his head. "Gray's not using her as bait." Rick raised a brow. "Then what's this?" Ash stared at the map, at the symbol burned faintly into the corner. "He's not luring us away from Chloe," Ash said slowly. "He's pointing us towards something else." Jonah frowned. "Why help us?" Ash closed the box gently, breath tightening. Because he thinks we can't stop what's coming. Clara swallowed. What is coming? Ash turned toward the dark tree-lined wind rolling across the fields like a warning. The choir, he said. And Gray's not the only one conducting. Ash stood with both hands braced on the table, eyes fixed on the map Gray had left like a twisted invitation. The red route carved through the mountains, ending at a single structure stamped with an inked symbol, one they had seen before, painted in twisted circles across basement walls. Jonah hovered by the window, checking the field for movement every few seconds. Rick paced the length of the room, jaw grinding like he was chewing through the rage holding him upright. Clara sat beside Chloe, not touching her but staying close enough that the girl could reach if she needed. Chloe hadn't spoken since the lockbox was opened. Her face was pale, but her eyes pinned the photo of the cabin with a stare that said she wasn't seeing the picture, she was remembering something. Rick slammed his palm against the table. He wants us chasing ghosts. Ash shook his head. Ghosts don't leave maps. Jonah exhaled sharply. So what? This is a game, he's testing us. No, Clara said quietly. He's clearing the board. They all turned. She pointed at the corner of the map. Small markings, circles with slashes through them. 5 of them. Basements, she said. 5. And we've only found 1. Ash lowered himself beside the table, studying the red-inked route again. The cabin is the 6th. Clara nodded. Or the last. The storm wind rattled the farmhouse windows. Chloe flinched, pulling Ash's jacket tighter around herself. She finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. There's going to be fire. Rick stopped pacing. What fire? Chloe's eyes stayed fixed on the map. He said he would burn the sky. He said it would hide everything. Jonah frowned. Smoke cover, Clara inhaled sharply. A diversion. Ash looked at the girl. Chloe. When did he say that? She swallowed. When he came back. When he thought I was asleep. He told the quiet man that the choir would move under the smoke. Jonah cursed. Son of a... He's transporting them tonight. Rick kicked the leg of the table. We need the location. Now. Ash tapped the map again. The cabin. Jonah leaned over. There's nothing near that ridge. No roads? No towns? That's dead country. Exactly, Ash replied. Nobody looks there. Rick grabbed his jacket. So we ride. But Ash didn't move. He looked at Chloe. Her hands were shaking. Chloe, he said softly, kneeling in front of her. Do you know what's at the cabin? She shook her head, then stopped. Her breathing hitched. She pressed a fist against her mouth. Clara gently pulled it away. Sweetheart, talk to us. Chloe closed her eyes. The words trembled out. He took me there once. The room stilled. Rick swallowed. How old were you? Chloe's voice was barely audible. 7. Ash's chest tightened. What did you see? He asked. Chloe took a breath like it hurt. A room with mirrors. Jonah straightened. Mirrors, she nodded. He said they show the truth. He made us stand in front of them. If you cried, her voice cracked. They took you downstairs. Rick's face hardened. What was downstairs? Chloe wrapped her arms around herself. Music. Ash froze. Music, she nodded again, tears gathering. Not real music. Just humming. Lots of humming, like everyone was trying not to scream. Jonah whispered, the choir. Ash rose slowly. The route on the map wasn't just a path. It was a timeline, each curve and turn marked with numbers. He followed them with his finger. 214. 303 410. Timestamps. Clara realized it at the same moment. He's planning the transfer by the minute. Rick grabbed the map. We're losing time. Jonah pulled out his radio. Mason, get every rider you can reach. Anyone within 50 miles. Static crackled. Mason's voice came through. Already on it. Half the order is en route. Ash zipped his jacket. Saddle up. Before he could move, Chloe grabbed his hand. Ash, she whispered. He's going to set the cabin on fire. Clara stiffened. With the kids inside, no, Chloe said. After what Rick asked. Chloe looked at him with a tremor that didn't belong to a child. After they finished choosing. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Jonah was first to break it. We move now. They rushed outside. Engines revved. The thunder of bikes rolled across the field like a storm breaking open. But Ash paused at the farmhouse door. Chloe stood there, eyes, huge face, ghost pale. He knelt again, quick, urgent. You stay with Clara. You stay with Mason. No one else. Chloe nodded slowly. You'll stop him. Ash said nothing, because promises made to kids like Chloe had to be earned in blood. He climbed onto his bike. Rick and Jonah flanked him. The rest of the order arrived in the distance, headlights slicing through the night in long, bright spears. Ash revved the engine. The sound shook the field. Clara yelled over the noise, "Bring them home!" Ash lowered his visor. "We will!" And then they rode, down the gravel road, across the highway, toward the mountains, toward the cabin with mirrors, toward Gray's final move. The storm rolled over the ridge as they disappeared into the dark fire already licking the horizon. Ash reached the ridge first. The cabin crouched at the tree line like a wound, shadows crawling from its eaves windows, glowing faintly, as if the building were breathing. Smoke drifted low across the ground, not wildfire smoke, controlled, deliberate smothering, the kind meant to hide movement. Rick rolled up beside him, visor half lifted. He's here. Jonah's truck braked behind them, gravel popping under the tires. He stepped out with a crowbar in one hand, flashlight in the other. No guards, no lookouts. That's wrong. Ash didn't answer. Wrong was Gray's specialty. They approached the cabin, low, silent. The air vibrated with something faint like a hum, distant but constant, drifting through the wood walls. Rick frowned. That's not a generator. Jonah listened, face tightening. Kid's Ash shook his head. Too steady. They reached the door. No lock. Just like the last houses. Gray wanted them inside. Ash pushed it open. The smell hit first bleach and incense sharp enough to sting. Inside, a hallway stretched toward a single staircase descending underground. A lantern flickered on the landing below. Jonah muttered basement again. Of course. Rick glanced up the stairs, empty, and then down. He's funneling us. Ash nodded once. Then we break the funnel. He descended without hesitation. The basement wasn't like the others. No cages, no crates, no symbols scrawled on walls. Instead, chairs, dozens arranged in rows facing a raised platform. And behind that, a wall of mirrors. Some cracked, some warped, some so polished they reflected only silhouettes, not faces. In front of the platform stood Gray, hands folded, calm, like a pastor waiting for a late congregation. Ash, he said softly, you made good time. Rick lifted his weapon. Where are the kids? Gray nodded toward a side door. Safe. Jonah took a step, but Ash lifted a hand, stopping him. Gray smiled, faint and patient. You finally learned to listen. Ash's stare didn't waver. You gave us the map. You led us here. Why? Gray gestured to the chairs. Because you wanted to see the truth as badly as I wanted to show it. Rick scoffed. You're done preaching. Gray's eyes didn't move. You think this ends with me? Ash stepped closer. The mirrors reflected 100 angles of him, broken, stretched, distorted. Gray watched him. You ever wonder why they follow me, why they listen, why they return? They want order, Ash. Certainty. Purpose. I give them what the world denies. Ash's jaw clenched. You take what the world protects. Do I? Gray asked softly. Or do I collect what the world throws away? The hum grew louder. Rick stiffened. What is that? Gray pointed behind them. The side door opened, and 8 children stepped out, not bound, not bruised. Standing calmly, eyes vacant, faces expressionless, like sleepwalkers. Jonah whispered, They're not drugged. Of course not, Gray replied gently. They chose this. No, Ash said. They survived this. Gray tilted his head. Survival and surrender look terribly similar when you don't understand the difference. Rick raised his gun again. They're coming with us. Gray didn't move. They'll follow whichever voice is strongest. Ash stepped between Rick and the children, his voice low. You're done manipulating them. Gray held his gaze. Then show them a better truth. He reached into his coat. Rick fired one shot, splitting the air. But Gray didn't fall. Instead, he held up an object, a small metal keyblade already gathering around the bullet wound in his shoulder. This, Gray whispered, opens the last door. Jonah lunged. What door? Gray dropped the key. It clattered across the concrete. Before anyone could reach it, a thunderous crack split the ceiling. Smoke poured from above. A second explosion shook the walls, shaking dust loose from the rafters. Clara's voice burst through Jonah's radio, panicked, hoarse. The truck is burning. Chloe's gone. Someone took her. Ash, he took her. Everything inside Ash froze. Rick snarled, Where is she? Gray looked almost serene even as blood soaked through his shirt. She's on the ridge. Ash surged forward. Rage. Fear, everything blurring into one primal motion. But Gray stepped back into the shadows of the stage. You won't reach her in time if you stay here. Another explosion. Flames licked down the stairwell. Jonah grabbed the key. We need to go. Now. Rick herded the children toward the exit. They obeyed, moving like shadows. Ash turned toward the stage, but Gray was already gone. Not escaped. Slipped away. Like smoke. The fire thickened. Heat pulsed off the walls. Ash spun toward the stairs. Move, they raced up as the flames roared down behind them. Smoke clawed at their throats. The door at the top burst open under Ash's shoulder, spilling them into the night. The cabin roof was on fire. Flames writhing upward, lighting the forest in molten orange. Jonah herded the kids toward the tree line where Mason and 2 other riders waited with blankets and water. Rick grabbed Ash's arm. The ridge. Now. Ash didn't need the reminder. They ran through the burning, clearing across the dirt path, winding upward. Branches whipped past. Embers floated like burning snow. Ash heard it before he saw it. A sob. Then a voice, Gray's, soft, coaxing, too close to the edge. They reached the ridge. Chloe stood near the cliff, trembling eyes, unfocused. Gray stood behind her, one hand lifted, not touching, just guiding. Ash felt his heartbeat tear through his ribs. Chloe, she turned, just slightly, enough to see him. Gray didn't look at Ash, only spoke to her. You said you wanted to be free. Ash stepped forward. Slow. Controlled. No, she said she wanted to be safe. Gray's eyes met his. Cold. Certain. You can't save them all, Ash. You couldn't before. You can't now. Rick flanked right. Jonah left. Gray lifted a single finger. Stay back or she jumps. Wind howled across the ridge. Chloe took one step forward, but then her voice broke through the roar. I'm already not alone. Gray blinked. That was all Ash needed. He surged forward. Rick moved with him. Jonah hit low. Gray stumbled. Ash grabbed Chloe, pulling her away from the edge. She collapsed into him, shaking. Rick cuffed Gray. Jonah searched him, pulling out 2 vials, a blade, and a folded note. The sirens began rising in the distance. Gray smiled through busted lips. You stopped nothing. Ash didn't answer. He carried Chloe away from the cliff. The night burned behind them. But the choir, Gray's choir, was broken, and the last door had opened. Federal lights washed the ridge in cold blue long after the flames died. The cabin smoldered in the distance, a black husk against the first hint of dawn. Agents moved through the ash with gloves and clipboards, cataloging every fragment, every mirror shard, every trace of the network Gray insisted would never end. Ash didn't watch them. He sat on the back step of the ambulance boots. On the gravel, Chloe, wrapped in a gray blanket beside him. She leaned against his arm, not clinging, not afraid, just resting like she'd been running for years, and finally felt allowed to stop. Clara stood close, talking quietly to a medic about the other children. Rick gave statements nearby, terse and controlled. Jonah hovered by the truck, hands blackened with soot but restless, ready to move again if needed. But the night wasn't raging anymore. It was quiet, too quiet for anyone except the people who'd earned it. Chloe lifted her head a little. Are they going to take him away? Ash didn't look in Gray's direction, didn't need to. 2 agents were loading the man into a reinforced van, wrists, bound ankles, shackled mouth, cut on one side from where Rick's knee had landed. Gray wasn't fighting. He wasn't preaching. He just stared forward like he was memorizing a horizon only he could see. Ash nodded. Yeah. They're taking him somewhere he won't touch anyone again. Chloe studied his face, searching for the part he didn't say for how long. Will he get out? Will someone else take his place? But she didn't ask. Instead, she whispered, "Good." Clara joined them, her voice soft. They'll place the kids in emergency care first. Real care. Verified. I made them promise. Ash gave her a faint nod. It wasn't victory, but it was something like a beginning. The agents moved to load more evidence. Cameras flashed. A director barked orders. Rick returned from giving his final statement, expression unreadable. They're going to dig for months, he muttered to Ash. Paper trails, fake licenses, old shelters, whole chains coming apart. Ash didn't respond. Rick nudged him lightly. We did something tonight. Yeah, Ash said, voice low. Something. Jonah approached, wiping his hands on a rag. Truck's good enough to roll. Clara's taking the kids to a safe nurse 2 towns over. Should be stable by morning. Clara nodded. You can come, Chloe. If you want. Chloe hesitated. Her grip on Ash's sleeve tightened. He turned toward her, meeting her eyes. You'll be safe. She looked down at her shoes. Will you come later? Ash didn't promise easily. He didn't promise lightly. Not with a kid who'd had the world break every promise before she could even spell the word. But he answered anyway. Yes. Chloe nodded once, trusting the word completely. Clara led her toward the truck. Chloe glanced back just once. Ash raised a hand, not a wave, just a signal, I see you. She mirrored it, small palm steady despite everything. Then she climbed in, and the truck pulled away. The ridge felt emptier immediately. Rick kicked at a stone. You heading out, Ash looked toward the faint road curling between the trees. Not yet. Jonah leaned against the railing. You, staying for the debrief, no. Rick snorted. Didn't think so. Agents moved past them hauling crates. The sun crept over the hillside, painting the smoke gold. For the first time in a long time, Ash let himself breathe fully. No engines roaring, no chase waiting, just the thin whistle of morning wind across the burned grass. Jonah exhaled long and low. You know he's not done. Ash nodded. I know. Rick crossed his arms. But the kids, they're out. That's what matters. Yeah, Ash said. It is. The three of them stood together in the soft light, battered, burned, bruised, but upright, steady, alive. The kind of alive that doesn't need noise to prove it. A young agent approached Ash with a clipboard, stuttering. Sir, we found something addressed to you. Ash raised a brow. To me, the agent handed him a sealed envelope. Clean, crisp, new. Not burned, not smoke-stained. Jonah frowned. He had time to write you a letter. Ash opened it cautiously. Inside was a photo. Chloe standing outside a small school entrance backpack, slung over one shoulder, hair tied back neatly. She was smiling. Not forced, not thin. Real. The kind of smile kids are supposed to have. On the back, a single line, you found me. Now I'm finding me. Ash folded the photo and tucked it into the inner pocket of his vest. Rick watched him. Good news, Ash didn't show the picture, didn't explain. He just stood, tightened his gloves, and stepped toward his bike. The agent cleared his throat. We can arrange a secure escort out of the area. Ash shook his head. Don't need one. Jonah grinned faintly. Road's yours again. Ash swung his leg over the bike. Always was. Rick clasped his shoulder once wordless. Jonah mirrored it. Then they stepped back, giving him room. Ash pulled down his visor. The engine fired. Not loud, not aggressive. Just steady like a heartbeat that finally settled after a long night. He rolled forward, gravel crunching beneath the tires, the smoke-thinned air parting as he eased onto the road. The others watched until he disappeared between the trees, swallowed by the same silence he'd learned to live with. Miles away, Chloe stared out the truck window, drawing small patterns on the glass with her finger. When she saw the horizon shift, she smiled, not because she knew where Ash was, but because she knew she didn't have to. He'd done what mattered. He'd given her back the road she'd never been allowed to walk. And somewhere ahead, as the rising sun carved the sky into gold and blue, Ash rode on, no sirens behind him, no flames ahead, just the quiet justice of distance. A justice earned, a justice kept, a justice written in cold ink. The story you've just traveled through, full of shattered silences, bruised truths, and hard-won courage, carries a reminder that speaks far beyond its characters. Real justice often begins in the quiet moments when someone chooses to stand up instead of stand by. Many people spend years trapped in systems or relationships that tell them to stay small, stay silent, stay grateful for the little they're given. But silence can become a cage, and fear can become a language. Stories like this remind us that breaking away, whether from a person, a belief, or a lifetime of being told you don't matter, isn't an act of rebellion. It is an act of survival. It is an act of reclaiming your own name. For older adults who've lived long enough to see the same patterns repeat across generations, this truth carries even more weight. People don't heal because the world suddenly becomes kind. They heal because someone finally chooses to listen. And sometimes that someone is a stranger. Sometimes it's a community. And sometimes it has to be ourselves. As the American saying goes, the darkest hour is just before dawn, and often it takes one brave step to let the light back in. If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear your reflections. What part resonated? Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone broke the cycle of silence? Share your thoughts below. Your voice might be the reminder someone else needs. If you'd like more stories that blend intensity, emotion, and meaning, hit like and consider subscribing so you won't miss the next journey. Wishing you a calm night, steady healing, and the quiet courage to face tomorrow with a little more light.